So the Bruins didn't go 3-0 in Spain. The sky's not falling, right? We'll talk about it on Locked On UCLA.
You are Locked On UCLA, your daily podcast on the UCLA Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back once again to the Locked On UCLA podcast. I'm your host, Zach Anderson-Yoxsimer. Thanks for making this show your first listen each and every day. It's free wherever you get your podcast, and it's available on YouTube. So like, comment, and subscribe. Download the episodes. Become an everydayer, because if you're an everydayer, you would have known that I've been talking about, hey, maybe Dante Moore might start. Well, he does not. Basketball. We've been talking basketball for forever. Now that they're actually playing games, what does it mean? We'll talk about all that today. This episode's brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every potential new hire feels like a high-stakes wager for your small business. Go to LinkedIn Jobs to find those right people, and go to linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, so the Bruins went to Spain, right? We had a whole fun topic talking about who do I think needs to step up during the Spain trip. How are the Bruins going to play? How would they gel without a Dembona and a Diamara, Berke Bouillon Tunchil? Without their three literal biggest players on the team for the most part, if you bear with me for Nuba and Devin Williams, they're three most important post-presence players probably during the season in one way or another. So they go to Spain, the Bruins dominate for the most part. They get a win and another win, only to play Girona and get absolutely waxed. The problem is, as you probably may have already seen if you're listening and wondering, they didn't release the actual scorer's closed door for this final game that the Bruins played in Girona, Spain, and they only released UCLA stats. So they didn't release the opponent's stats. They didn't release the final score, but for all intents and purposes, the Bruins got blown out. They were without Jan Vide. So UCLA was without four scholarship players, and they played like it against a team that was good. Even Mick Cronin said, well, we finally figured out that these teams in Europe are good. This is an unofficial quote that I saw from him, I believe, in the UCLA postgame story, where I was like, wait, why is there no score? Well, nobody in the public can know. Closed door, limited to less than 30 people. But the Bruins, they took the L. That's all that was known. There was no stream, limited knowledge, and the Bruins took a big one because Vide was hurt and unavailable to play in the final game. And at some point, with what you've got available, the Bruins, as young as they are we're going to take a beating. That's why it's so tough to truly gauge this team this year, because they can have clunkers like this. No, they're not going to be playing European all-stars or super teams every game without four players that could probably play most of the game in certain aspects at certain schools. They play most of the game, if not play most of the game for UCLA, like the Vides at times. Of course, Bona and Berke and Mar, depending on how their roles turn out after the end of the summer, going into the fall, heading into the season in November. But in the end, UCLA took a loss. It doesn't really count against anything, but it is a learning time for the Bruins, which is what Mick Cronin talked about. He's not so much worried about wins and losses. They haven't had as much time to practice. They've been out sightseeing, and this team, after a few days, probably was a little rusty, maybe a little bit out of shape, and they did not play well. The Bruins turned it over 24 times. Ilan Fible himself turned it over 6 times, and UCLA just, quite frankly, didn't play that well. They shot 37% from the field, 10% from three. The Bruins overall in their 3 games were 8 for 47, I think, from downtown, a woeful shooting percentage. And I know there's the idea of if you have bigs down low, then you can't go and have the European bigs go out and defend the wings as easy as they might have early on. But UCLA could not shoot the 3 ball that well. Stefanovic was not as red hot, didn't get as many 3-point attempts as he had in games past. And the Bruins, quite frankly, just played bad. They missed 8 free throws. They've been showcasing they don't always hit their free throws, depending on who takes them. But the Bruins weren't electric. They had their worst performance taking care of the basketball. They had 25 turnovers in their first 2 games. And I thought, all right, Mick Cronin probably wouldn't be too pleased, right? But they've been forcing turnovers. Well, the difference in this game is that UCLA had 24 turnovers and only had 2 steals. Only 2 steals. And while we don't know how many turnovers the other team committed, we do know that UCLA, if they're not forcing turnovers and you're coughing up the basketball, that's probably not going to be a game that is close whatsoever. And if you think about Vide actually had 5 steals in the first game in Spain, a steal in the next game. So his lack of on-court presence, maybe I'm not going to say he's going to account for 20 steals or 30 points or whatever, how big the deficit blowout loss was. But in the end, the Bruins lost a little decent defense from what Vide brought, and at least in that first game. It could be a little different based on the competition. He's not going to go rip it 5 times from clearly the best team the Bruins played throughout this trip. But UCLA did not play so well. Again, Andrews scored 17. He led all scorers in that final game, 6 of 14. Brandon Williams was taking 11 shots. He was 2 of 11 for 5 points. If Williams is taking that many shots, I'm not sure what the Bruins offense is looking like. Of course, he played 17 minutes, 18 minutes, and that was probably a little bit at the end there. Lazar Stefanovic, 12 points, 6 boards, but his worst game in terms of taking care of the basketball, 4 turnovers. Sebastian Mack had 12 points, 3 rebounds, but also 3 turnovers. Nuba was a non-factor down low. Devin Williams playing 20 minutes, 6 points, 7 boards. Nice to see him get some buckets. But Feeble was a tough 20 minutes with 6 turnovers, 5 rebounds, and no steals to account for it. Someone who has been compared by Mick Cronin himself as, I don't want to say the second coming of Jalen Clark, but can have some Jalen Clark-like tendencies defensively if he develops into a player like that. McClendon, 9 points, 4 boards, but he had 4 turnovers. Most of the Bruins who touched the basketball for more than 20 seconds had at least 2 turnovers or more. So it just clearly was not one of their games when they couldn't shoot it anywhere on the court. They're just practically handing the ball to the other team, and it's a learning experience. Now to kind of finish up this first segment, let's talk about the highs and the lows of some of these players, right? Again, you're missing Bona, Burke, Mara. So there was going to be a little bit of grace despite the rough rant there for this UCLA team to start. But I kind of talked about 3 players coming in as UCLA's key guys that needed some time to develop and maybe earn some more time, and who might have not actually earned some time. I took, if you're an everydayer, a few weeks ago talking about, maybe it was 2 weeks ago, time flies. I don't actually know. It was Vide, Andrews, and Sebastian Mack in terms of guys who I thought needed to play well and earn some time. So let's take a look at some of their stats. Dylan Andrews, in his 3 games, 23 minutes, 29 minutes, 26 minutes, getting a bulk of the time. It doesn't denote whether he was a starter against Girona, but he did start one of the first 2 games. He was the leading scorer for the Bruins in a game where UCLA couldn't shoot. He had the close to best shooting percentage. He probably did, actually. Now I do math, 6 of 14. He had the best shooting percentage of any of the Bruins who shot 10 or more shots. So clearly he was getting buckets. Didn't hit any threes, but was getting the ball in the basket. Not a lot of assist numbers in his 3 games. 1 assist, 3 assists. And for someone who is looking to be the leading floor general, you'd like to see that assist total get up. Maybe he's just moving the ball around, running the Mick Cronin offense. But Cronin already alluded to this coming before the trip, that he hasn't played as many minutes. He's got to earn it, got to see what happens. And while we did see Mack and, McClendon, we saw the mixture of lineups. Cronin wasn't going to keep it the same the whole 3 games, depending on the score a little bit. In the end, the assist numbers weren't there. Scoring, he had double figures in all 3 games. Limited the turnovers, 6 turnovers in 3 games. He had 2 on average per game. The problem is you have more turnovers than assists, which is not something Mick Cronin will really like that much coming out of someone who's going to be your starting point guard. It's different coming from Tiger Campbell, who had one of the better assist to turnover ratios in the country. But then if you're going backwards, right, you have more turnovers than assists. That's something that Andrews is going to have to work on going forward into this whole season for the Bruins to be successful, to simply run an offense with a team that doesn't have that dynamic ball-dominant point guard that Tiger was. Andrews might be asked to play that role, but will the Bruins run it all the time through him? I'm not so sure, which is why I thought Sebastian Mack would be another key cog for UCLA, right? Cronin alluded to how much they needed scoring, simplifying his role as a true freshman. I wasn't completely sure about the importance of Mac's role for this team this year, but clearly it's to score. He had 17 points a couple of times, led the Bruins once, second in lead points the other time, had 12 points in the final game the Bruins played, had 5 assists as a guard, combined between 3 games, eventually had a total of 9 assists, but committed at least 3 turnovers every game. Some freshman mistakes. The Bruins are going to ask him to score. A volume shooter who shot 34%, 17 for 50, which is not necessarily going to cut it. It's one thing if you're Hawkes, right? Even though Hawkes was the reigning Pac-12 player of the year, right? He didn't always have the best shooting percentage, but he was a gamer, even though Chip Kelly doesn't believe in gamers. So that's a whole nother thought. Mac, I'm not sure if he's going to get 15, 16, 20 shots a game to only make 6 of them, unless he gets to the line, finds open shots. We'll at some point get a better viewing of Mac to understand, is he missing open shots? Is he taking tough force shots? What is the reason that he's shooting 34%? But he can score, and the Bruins are going to need someone to get buckets. And I think Mick Cronin is going to live with it for a little bit, but at some point that percentage, the efficiency, the shot selection will have to improve going forward as a true freshman as he battles with Jan Vide. Vide kind of looking for a wing spot, whether it be the 2, the backup point guard. Vide unfortunately did not play in that last game, giving us only 2 games to look at. Vide playing a combined 50 minutes, 8 points, 2 assists, 2 rebounds, 5 steals one game, 5 points and assists, 3 rebounds and a steal the next game, and did not play. And when you're looking for someone to play point guard, when your team is turning it over 24 times, only committing 2 steals, you would think Vide would have an impact in a positive way in a game where if he simply was on the court, not going to maybe flip the game in UCLA's favor. But I think maybe his absence proves something to Mick Cronin. I'm not sure what Cronin's going to see, but the fact that they played so badly, I know they're missing 4 guys who can make key contributions this year, but I do think Vide's role might have been solidified. Probably not more than Mac, because the Bruins need someone to score, and Mac might earn that starting job simply because of his scoring ability. But Vide's role, especially if he can take care of the basketball, facilitate, and find ways to get more assists than turnovers, there's an outside shot he could overtake Andrews. And I would like Andrews to succeed this year and Vide too. And both of them succeeding doesn't mean that they're not on the court ever together, and that means that they won't ever play. I think they could both succeed in a positive manner, but I think the importance somewhat of Vide, of course, missing your entire post is going to make a complete difference for the UCLA offense. At some point, UCLA is going to have to shoot. The Bruins will have to make their threes, and in the end, take care of the basketball, hit your threes. Those are things the Bruins can work on. I think a sour spot for me, the youngster Feeble, just the inability to take care of the basketball. And at some point, there is going to be a freshman when you have 7 of them, 8 newcomers, 7 freshmen, true freshmen, that is. There's going to be someone who struggled to take care of the basketball. So I wonder how much Feeble will have the ball in his hands versus how much he'll grow from the end of August to the beginning of November and throughout the rest of the season until March 2024 if he's given an ample opportunity to play. Until then, we obviously have talked about Stefanovic, clearly the bright spot for this Bruins team. Very impactful, double-figure scoring in every game, hitting the glass, the vocal leader, that's your bright spot. Feeble needing to improve, especially in ball security. And I think Andrews proved he can score good things. Mac needing to improve the shooting and the shot selection probably. He can score. Vide, the game he missed, the Bruins played terrible. So can you associate those two together completely? No, but I think that probably bodes well. I miss a game and the team plays poorly. There's always some good psychological benefits for that as well. So that's the Bruins Spain trip. How is this going to impact the team when they play the rest of their crazy games this year in their final year of the Pac-12? Only time will tell, and we'll talk about that as the season begins in just about nearly 2 months from the dropping of this podcast. How nutty is that? How nutty is that? Well, UCLA football dropped their depth chart, and were there some surprises? Absolutely. I mean, we know the biggest surprise about quarterback in terms of the roles being utilized and how many will be used week 1 versus Coastal Carolina, but maybe some other spots. Maybe not as much transfer love as Chip Kelly's been given, to his transfers. We'll talk about that coming next on Locked On UCLA. Well, if you're wondering, if you're a small business, what's the best way? What are some great ways to try and find ways to get a best candidate available, right? Every new hire, every high stakes wager, it seems like in the hiring process, is a potential new hire these days, and you want to be 100% certain that you get the best. LinkedIn Jobs helps find your people faster and for free. Small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs number one in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors because they've got tools such as screening questions. You can narrow the field. You can focus on the candidates who have those right skills, the actual experience needed, so you can prioritize not only who you just want to interview, but eventually hire and make that process a lot easier. All you have to do is go to LinkedIn Jobs, where they can help you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Second segment of the Locked On UCLA podcast, and talking football, week one depth chart released. What does it mean for UCLA? Well, I've already gone a couple of episodes talking about what could be the rules. What does everything look like quarterback-wise? Garber's the starter, or as Chip Kelly would say, he's taking the first snaps. Moore's role will be important or maybe irrelevant. It is unknown. And Kylan Schlee, what I believe will be a bit of an RPO option, and maybe, dare I say, a special teams option in certain scenarios based on his previous punting experience, as little as that may be, and his ability to run the ball at least a lot better than those other two quarterbacks you'd rather keep healthy. Not that you don't want Schlee healthy, but he's got nearly 1,000, closing in on 1,000 career rushing yards with a good season this year. Someone who's more of a dual threat quarterback than I would say Moore and Garbers are. In the end, what are some surprises I took from the depth chart? And some might agree with me. You can even see Ben Bulge. You can see the Bro Report. You can see all different people who would agree with me, or I might agree with them, I should probably say. But where are spots that transfers were brought in and didn't win spots? Interesting. Jordan Anderson, who is supposed to be a huge four-star transfer commit, at least depending on what rankings you use. He's a redshirt senior coming over from Bowling Green. But it's actually Kenny Churchwell III, who's the redshirt senior starting safety. Interesting that he won that job. Not saying anything against Churchwell or Anderson, but that's one key position where the transfer didn't win out. Then you've got, this one isn't necessarily a transfer situation, but Kamari Ramsey, the other starting safety, redshirt freshman starting over the senior Nimmo Jr. So you've got an unexpected starter maybe on one side and a freshman starting safety on the other. What does that say about Nimmo and Anderson? I don't entirely know. Roles can change throughout the year. Maybe understanding the schematics of Danton Lynn can be important. Either way, those were some surprising, interesting, very interesting thoughts. In terms of other key spots, you've got Bruno Fina, who is the 6'5 redshirt junior starting in place of Kadir Kunta, who was brought in from Old Dominion, and he didn't win the starting job, at least initially. So maybe the Bruins are a lot deeper on the line than we think. Josh Carlin in front of the Colorado transfer, Jake Wiley, both seniors, 6'5", 6'6". Funny enough, it was the 6'5 left tackle and right guard, both 6'5", beating out the 6'6", a little bit bigger options behind the bench, the transfers from other schools who have already played, and now they're sitting behind those guys. Very interesting, right? You look at tailback, and everything has been pointed, even I pointed a little bit at Carson Steele, got the hair, the buff, everything. But TJ Harden, quite frankly, will probably get those first carries in 2023, and it will certainly be a two-headed monster. Harden, Steele, right? Harden and Steele, and then it says or on the depth chart with Colson and Yankoff. And yet, while it is a three-man job, it is expected to be TJ Harden at least first, the 6'2 tailback. Carson Steele, who's 6'1", 225 as a tailback. It's interesting that, all right, the guys coming back are winning these jobs over the starters, right? Moliki Matavau, who with Carson Ryan and Hudson Habermill will be battling for starting spots. Habermill did a nice job last year catching passes with Ezekiel, who was in the undrafted part of the NFL for a little bit in the preseason. Habermill, I think, will hold the reins a little bit initially for the starting tight end spot. While I'm not sure how much the Bruins will use the tight ends, you've got J. Michael Sturdivant, the Loyas, the Kyle Fords, Browns. The list goes on and on at receiver. So we'll see how much they use at tight end. And just look at the different places, right? 3 or 4 spots, 5 spots maybe, that we would have expected transfers to win the job right away. And that just hasn't happened between the starting safety with Churchwell beating out Anderson, 2 offensive line spots between Fina, and then you've got Wiley sitting on the bench. Even Harden might take that first snap as Steele is still expected to have a big role. And then maybe you can throw in the surprise that, oh, well, actually, what about Dante Moore? Not the transfer necessarily, but some might have thought Moore might have been gifted the spot. I was hoping so. But in the end, Garber's won it, and the quarterback battle's still technically ahead, considering all 3 are expected to play in one shape or another, one form or another, against Coastal Carolina. And yet, as much as Transfer U, UCLA touted that football-wise, they joked about it, remember, in late 2022 with the tweet, only for other schools to talk about, we're Transfer U. No, we're Transfer U. The Bruins have talent, especially at the skill positions, and they tried to fill some holes defensively with the transfers. And yet, interesting, there are some key spots where transfers are coming in, just like the kicker and punter will be key players this year for UCLA, but those are some fun question marks, I thought. Not maybe weird decisions, but eyebrow raising. Ben Bolch did the same thing, the UCLA beat reporter. Other people, when you looked at this, hey, some interesting spots where the transfers weren't promised spots possibly. Maybe they were, but they didn't win it right away. Does that hurt UCLA's recruiting? Does that mean these guys played so well in the spring into fall that they earned the spot? Probably. And you just wonder what that means for the transfer game moving forward, and if those roles will shift. Of course, injuries play a factor, but if they'll shift based on who performs throughout this season. All interesting thoughts in my mind heading into this one. So the Bruins taking on Coastal Carolina. What does that mean? They've got a bevy of weapons, and we're not even going to talk about Grayson McCall, the 3-time Sun Belt Player of the Year, and the preseason favorite to win it for a 4th time at Coastal Carolina. I'm not sure I've ever seen someone win an award for a Conference Player of the Year 4 times, but who are the other weapons the Bruins have to defend to make sure McCall and maybe some defense, some special teams are all ineffective when the Bruins take on the Chanticleers in Game 1 of 2023? Coming up next on the Locked On UCLA podcast. Final segment of Locked On UCLA today. Zach Anderson-Yoxsimer with you guys. Hey, stay tuned. You're going to have college football live. We're going to have a Locked On version. It's going to be on every channel. You'll see it on Locked On UCLA. Got some Locked On experts talking about college football, reacting to some games that happened early in week 1 or week 2 or whenever these games happen, right? We had week 0 just recently. Stay tuned. Early Friday mornings, there will be college football live. Don't be surprised when you don't hear my name on it necessarily. You'll see a lot of college football experts from around the Locked On family, the Locked On network, and they'll be talking some good college football every Friday morning. Stay tuned for some more fun from that. Final segment, let's talk some UCLA keys to victory. Who are some guys that Grayson McCall will go after? A one-time Bruin check-in when he hit the portal, only for that to not go much further than a check-in academically, which is what Chip Kelly said in terms of classes and how they match up for his major. Why do I keep saying Carson? Grayson McCall, who will he be throwing to? Well, initially, it'll be Sam Pinckney, who is a Blitnikoff watch list preseason guy, preseason Sun Belt, and we all know how crazy the Sun Belt got last year. We all know how close that game, how dangerously close the Bruins were losing to South Alabama, if not for the last-second field goal and a break for a botched fake special teams play that the Jaguars did. Otherwise, the Bruins were so thankful that they did. In the end, the Bruins are able to hold off last year, and I think this game might be very close this year because you got to stop Pinckney, who was someone who was a 71 receptions, 996 yards, led the team in these categories as a receiver, got some postseason accolades, and he didn't even start his career at Coastal Carolina, but this is one of the key wideouts, possession-wise, about 76 yards per game that the Bruins must shut down if McCall is to have a bad game. But the other guy, someone to look out for, while there is a bit of a three-headed monster, it was the redshirt freshman Jared Brown, who led the team with 6 touchdowns, got some freshman accolades. Because, hey, when you're just bursting on the scene in college football and you score that many times and you can find open windows to be open for a big-time quarterback and he trusts you in those spots, that's why Brown was very, very important for Coastal Carolina last year. Someone the UCLA Bruins should not lose in the red zone when it comes to scoring time. That is someone, at least from previous years' experience, that McCall trusted to score a couple of touchdowns, which led the team in receiving touchdowns. Couple of more guys to throw in there as we wrap up Locked On UCLA. JT Killen, hey, that's quite the name. It's someone who has been a long-time backer for Coastal Carolina. The Lake Wiley, South Carolina kid, 6'3", redshirt senior linebacker, part of Hero Sports Group of 5 All-American third team, Lombardi Award preseason list. The list goes on and on in terms of his accolades from 2022, his preseason look for 2023. He's trying to make that East-West Shrine Bowl eventually after this season's done. Last year, he was very important, JT Killen, as he had 9 tackles in a game, tackles for loss, started in all the games, had a team-high 96 tackles, had 8 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks, 4 pass breakups. So this is someone who could potentially ruin the Bruins night offensively with some big hits, some hurries, maybe a pass breakup or 2 over the middle if it's late from a Garbers or a Moore or a Schlee, whatever the offense looks like at the time. It's Killen who will be manning the middle of the field, and the Bruins have to be careful for him amongst some other key Chanticleers, but he is someone who is a preseason Sun Belt selection, someone the Bruins must keep an eye on. And the last one, probably the best name, right, especially as a returner, Matthew McDoom, who got preseason love for being a kickoff return specialist, had 22.5 yards returning-wise per game in the kickoff return game. So that means this kid can break loose, return one for a touchdown last year, 95 yards, Matthew McDoom, and can easily break loose, change the field position game if the Bruins can't kick it through the back of the end zone or they play it short. One big special teams play, especially when you play teams like the Coastal Carolinas, these teams that maybe can't handle the physicality of the game and try and go down on drive after drive, defensively, everything in between. But they can get a quick score on an early kickoff return for a touchdown. Maybe it's something along the likes of a field flipping run, and maybe they're going to be pinned back in their own end zone, and then boom, he returns it, gets out of trouble on some bad containment on the kickoff return team, and gets some good spot at the 50. Maybe it's right before halftime. I'm not sure. He is someone the Bruins must take a look at. And he did get a start in the Coastal Carolinas bowl game as a DB and played well. It's just his kickoff return talent is something the Bruins must keep an eye on. Because as we saw, week 1 versus Bowling Green in 2022, the Bruins were not ready on special teams. They were dropping punts, having it blocked, everything. They were not looking good on special teams. So if the Bruins aren't ready, this kid is going to take one to the house. He could easily break one off. I think he might break one off for a big run if he's given the opportunity to run one back in any part of the return game. But if the Bruins can contain him, they can get away from him, they boot it through the back of the end zone, that will be much, much better for UCLA so their defense can have a much easier starting position rather than just trying to pin him back in a weird corner and watch McDoom do his thing. That's a key guy to watch for Coastal Carolina because this Chanticleer team has won 12 straight non-conference regular season games. So we're not talking bowl games, everything in between. 12 straight non-conference regular season games dating back to the season opener of 2019. So this team knows what they're doing. They play in a sneaky tough conference, but they've beaten what? Kansas. And I know Kansas has gotten a little better, probably not as good when Coastal Carolina played them. They've beaten the number 8 team, BYU. Remember when they had that fun in that big game in 2020 when they beat the Cougars. And yet, here they are, an opportunity to try and knock off UCLA in their first ever meeting, and they've been doing the job. And I know Tim Beck is the new coach, new staff, new philosophies, wanting to keep this prestige that Coastal Carolina has been on these last few years. And you don't know how it transitions from year to year, but they've been getting the job done, especially earlier in the season, against teams who probably don't expect the speed and the talent of McCall and this Coastal Carolina team. That's why the Bruins got to be careful for a couple of those offensive weapons. You've got a kick returner, a dominant linebacker, a team that's ready to punch you in the mouth, and the Bruins must be ready. D'Anton Lynn's defense got to be ready. Chip Kelly, with all the quarterback rotation and shuffling, whether it's a lot or it's not, they've got to be ready, or else the Bruins will be in for a long night. A close one, I think, which we'll talk about that on the next episode of Locked On UCLA. For everydayers, stay tuned for that Friday episode, prediction time. We'll talk about some even bigger keys to the game overall and what's going to lead to a Bruin win or maybe a surprising Coastal Carolina one. That does it for Locked On UCLA. I'm Zach Anderson-Yoxsimer. Get your hands up, Bruins fans. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, UCLA. UCLA fight, fight, fights. This has been Locked On UCLA. Go Bruins.